All right, this is Math 1. We're going to go over Worksheet 6.1G, which is involving frequency tables, cumulative frequency tables, histograms. Mr. Trutna from Clovis High School. Okay, so this is what the worksheet looks like. In the first problem, it says that we are going to use the data to make a cumulative frequency table and a histogram. Okay, so let me just zoom in a little bit so it might be a little bit easier to see if you're doing this at home. Okay, so in order to make a cumulative frequency table, that's the first thing that we're going to do. So we're going to do that first, and then the second thing that we're going to do is we're going to use that table to create a histogram from our frequency table. Okay, so a frequency table, if you remember, what it's going to do is it's a cumulative frequency table. So whenever you make a cumulative frequency table, the frequency table that you're going to make is always going to have 3 columns. Okay, the middle column of a cumulative frequency table is always going to be your frequency, and this is where you're going to count how many times the pieces of data show up. And then your third column is always going to be your cumulative frequency. And the word cumulative, what you just need to think of that is that's like addition. It's an addition of the frequencies being added up as you go. And then the first column is always going to be titled whatever the data is about. So you can see we have all these numbers right here, and it represents runs per game. So we're just going to put runs here because that's what my first column is going to be about. Okay, so in order to make a table, what we want to do is we first want to figure out what is our range of numbers. Okay, so in other words, what's our lowest number? And you can see right here that 0 is our lowest number. And then we want to then find our highest number in our values, and you can see that 9 is our highest number right here. Okay, so what this is telling me is that my data that I'm dealing with is ranging from 0 to 9. And you don't need to write this down here, but I'm just going to write it down. So my range is going from a low of 0 to a high of 9. Okay, so if I count right there, that means my range is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So that means I have 10 items in my range. Okay, so there's going to be 10 items in my range. Going from 0 to 9, if I count every number, there's 10 items there. So what we want to do is we want to use the fact that we're going to have 10 items in my range, and then I want to figure out how do I want to create an interval for my table in runs. Okay, so what I do is I want to figure out, all right, I could either create an interval of 5, or I can create an interval of 2 for my data on how I do things. Okay, so and that would determine how many rows that I have. So I'm going to create 2 for my interval. Whenever you decide whatever your interval of values is going to be, you always want to make it a number that is divisible by however many items are in your range. So since I have 10 items in my range, that means I could either make an interval for my runs here by going every 2 runs or every 5. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and make an interval of 2. So that means my first interval would be 0 or 1 runs. That's 2 runs. My next interval would be 2 to 3 runs. My next one would be 4 to 5. My next would be 6 to 7. My next would be 8 to 9. That would be my last one. Okay? And so I'm going to use that to create my columns in my table. And this ultimately, as you will see, will be used to create my histogram as well, and how many bars that I'm going to create in my histogram when I work it out. Okay? So now what I do is I'm just going to count how many times each one of these runs score. So 0 and 1. So you can see, well, if I have a 1 here, that's once. I have a 0, that's twice. I have a 1. So my frequency of runs per game, 0 to 1, it happened 3 times. So that means my cumulative frequency right now is 3. Cumulative means, as you'll see, we're always adding from our frequency to what was before it, okay? Now to figure out how many the frequency of how many people or whatever this is representing scored 2 to 3 runs in a game. All right, so you can see I have a 3 there, that's once. There's a 3, that's 2. 3, 4 times. So there were 4 times a 2 or a 3 showed up. Now to create the cumulative frequency, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that frequency 4, but then I add it to the frequency before it, which is 3. So now I have a cumulative frequency of 7. Okay, so in cumulative frequency I'm always adding. Okay, 4 to 5, how many times do I see 4 to 5? Once, twice, 3 times, 4 times. So the frequency of 4 to 5 runs being scored was 4. So I'm going to take that frequency, I'm going to add it to the previous cumulative frequency. So now this gives me a cumulative frequency of 11. Okay, how many runs were between 6 and 7? Once, twice, 3 times. So the frequency of 6 to 7 runs was 3. So I'm going to take that frequency, 3. I'm going to add it to the cumulative frequency, 11. That gives me a cumulative frequency of 14 now. Okay, and the last one, 8 to 9, you can see I only have one of those. So I'm going to take that 1, I'm going to add it to 14. So my cumulative frequency is going to be at 15. Okay, so you guys, what that is telling me is that I have a total of 15 numbers in this data that I've collected. Okay, so now, this right here would be called a cumulative frequency table, and now I use the cumulative frequency table in order to make a histogram of the data. Okay, so a histogram, the way you set up a histogram is you always set up a histogram like this, where you have a vertical axis, you have a horizontal axis. You always label the vertical axis as the frequency. So this is going to be the frequency of how often something happened. And then the horizontal axis is always going to be labeled whatever the label is of your first column, which in this case is runs per game. Okay, so on the runs per game, I fill out, going along the bottom here, my intervals. So I have 0 to 1, I have 2 to 3, 4 to 5, 6 to 7, and 8 to 9. And then on frequency, I'm going to make tally marks here. Hopefully this is not me when they put me over the loudspeaker here. Okay, but anyhow, I'll just talk over it. My frequency is just going to be how many frequency times do I have. So you could see my lowest is 1, my highest frequency is 4. So I only really have to go up to 4 tally marks here. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is to create my histogram, I'm just going to create a bar going up for what was the frequency of each interval. So you can see 0 to 1, the frequency was 3. So for 0 to 1, I'm going to have a bar going up to 3. For 2 to 3, I'm going to create a bar going up to a frequency of 4. So I'm going to go up to 4 right here. And notice that when I create a histogram, the bars touch each other. Okay, that's the way a histogram works. Okay, the bars are always going to be touching each other. From 4 to 5, the frequency was 4, so that means the bar for 4 to 5 is going to be the same as the bar from 2 to 3. From 6 to 7, it was 3, so that should be even with the bar from 0 to 1, and I'm just hand sketching it, so it might be a little bit off. And then from 8 to 9, the bar was just going to be 1, and probably the best way to do it is you should get a ruler so you could line it up so it goes like that. Okay, so that would be my histogram from my cumulative frequency table of this value right here. All right, moving on to number 2, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to use this data, so this is the weight of whatever. Obviously this isn't people, I guess it could be babies. And then we're going to take this data, we're going to create a cumulative frequency table. and then we're going to use that frequency table in order to make us a histogram. Okay, so the cumulative frequency table always has 3 columns. So whenever you're asked to make a cumulative frequency table, just start off by drawing 3 columns. The very last column is going to be your cumulative frequency. That's the title of it every single time. It does not change for a cumulative frequency table. The middle column is always going to be titled frequency. That does not change. And then the first column is going to be titled whatever the data was about, which is weight here. Okay? Now, the biggest mistake that people make when they make a table is that they just automatically just take these numbers, they take the smallest one, which would be, looks like it's 8, so it looks like 8 right here is my lowest value or my smallest value. And then they take the highest value, which looks like it is 21, and then what they do is they just go, oh, I know what to do. I'm going to go 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and go all the way to 21. Okay, that's not the way we want to do it because that's just going to create way too many rows for my data. So I want to kind of make intervals of my data. Okay, so what this is telling me, because my low was 8, since I had a low of 8, and my high was 21, this tells me that my range in between an 8 and 21, and if I counted starting at 8 and I counted up to 21, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, that means that there are 14 items in my range. Okay, so this right here is telling me that there are 14 items starting at 8 and ending at 21. Okay, so that means when I set up my interval of how I'm going to make my interval of my values, I want to do it by something that is divisible by 14. All right, so what's divisible by 14? Well, 7 or 2. So we could set up our intervals going by 7s or going by 2s. Since the last one we did by 2s, let's go ahead and set up our interval going by 7s. Okay, so what does that mean? It means that I start at 8, and then my interval would be all numbers 7 above that. So 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So my first interval would be whatever this is about. Let's call them, I don't know, what do you want to call them? Fish, the weight of fish, I guess. Would be the interval between the weight of 8 and 14 pounds, and the next interval would be the weight of whatever these are, fish, from 15 to 21 pounds. So when I make my table, I'm only going to have 2 rows. So that means when I make my histogram, I'm only going to have two bars for my histogram. Okay, so now I'm going to count up the frequency. How many of the data, how much of my data had a weight between 8 and 14? There's 1, there's 2. Oh man, I messed up because you can see that my lowest number is 6 here. So that changes everything. So now I'm going to go 6. Okay, so that means that there's, let's see, how many is that? That means there's 16 items. Oh, that we could fix this. So that means I'm going to go intervals of 8. So I'm going to go from 6 to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So my first interval is going to be from 6 to 13. And my next interval will be from 14 to 21 right there. Alexis, Kylie Delk, why did you not catch that? That the lowest number was 6, not 8 right there, okay? All right, so sorry about that, but we fixed it really quickly. So 6 to 14, how many, what's the frequency of the weight between 6 and 14, okay? So there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4, there's 5, there's 6, there's 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So you can see that my frequency here, I had 11 pieces of data that fell between the interval of 6 to 14 pounds. My cumulative frequency is 11 because that's my first one. Then how much of my data fell between 15 and 21 pounds. Let me scratch that off so we can see it here. 15 to 21. You can see I got 1, 2, 3. So my frequency here is 3. There were 3 pieces of data between 15 and 21. So I take that, I add it to my previous frequency. That makes my cumulative frequency 14. Okay? Now I'm going to take that data right there, and I'm going to create a histogram from my frequency table. Okay, so what I do is remember when we make a histogram, you draw a horizontal line and a vertical line. The horizontal line is labeled whatever your first column is, which is weight. Then you put in your intervals. I'm only going to have 2. I'm going to have an interval from 6 to 14 pounds, and my weight is in pounds, probably want to put that. And then I have an interval from 15 to 21 pounds. And then my vertical axis on my histogram is going to be my frequency. Okay, and you can see my frequency goes from 3 to 11. So when I make my tally marks, I think it's very viable that I go by ones again. So that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I don't have to go any higher than 11. Okay, sometimes when you make your intervals, depending on your highest number, you might want to go by 2s or 4s or something. Like if the highest number was 45, you don't want to go by 1s. It'd be better to go by 5s or something like that. Okay, so 6 to 14, I had the frequency was 11, so I'm going to draw a bar going from 6 to 14, or for 6 to 14 going all the way up to 11. Okay, so this would be my representation of the interval 6 to 14 pounds. 15 to 21 pounds, the frequency was 3. So I'm just going to go up to 3 right here. And I'm going to make another bar like this. Okay, so you guys, this would be my histogram if I only set up an interval of every 8. Then I only end up with 2 bars there. Okay, moving on to the back side here. So in numbers 3, 4, 5, and 6, we want to tell whether each histogram is uniform, symmetric, or skewed. Okay, number 3 is uniform. The reason why it's uniform is if all the bars are basically the same height, it's uniform. Okay, number 4 would be skewed. All right, how do you know if a histogram is skewed? If the tallest bar is not in the middle, it's skewed. So you can see the tallest bar is shifted off to the right, so that's skewed. Number 5 would be skewed as well. And by the way, we would say number 4, going back to number 4, we would say it's skewed to the right. You did not have to say that, but that's what it would be. Number 5 is skewed because the tallest bar is not in the middle, but in this one, and you don't have to say it, but number 5 is skewed to the left. Okay, you can see the tallest bar is shifted off to the left from the middle. Now, at number 6, if you notice, the middle bar is the smallest, and then on either side, it basically looks exactly the same. Okay, so when that is the case, we call that is called symmetric or symmetry. So this is symmetric right here. So basically, to tell if a histogram is symmetric, if you draw an imaginary line going right through the middle of your histogram, if it's basically the same exact thing on both sides, then that's called symmetric. Okay, last 3 problems. The amount of gasoline that 80 drivers bought to fill their car's gas tanks is shown. Okay, below, so you can see we have a histogram. We have the number of drivers starting at 4 going up to 24, and then we have the number of gallons, and you can see the intervals of gallons, okay, that drivers used. Okay, so number 7, which interval represents the greatest number of drivers? So right here, so I'm finding the greatest number, so I'm looking for my tallest bar, which is right here, and that interval is 9.1 to 12. Number 7, how many drivers bought more than 12 gallons? So we're trying to figure out how many drivers bought more than 12 gallons. So that would be, if we go down here, number of gallons, so you can see 12 is right here, 9.1 to 12, so it would be any of these bars here that would be to the right of this interval of 12. So it would be that many right there, which looks like 18, plus this bar, which is, if we follow it over, that's 12, plus this bar, if we followed it over, you can see it's halfway between 4 and 8, so that would be at 6. So adding all those up, I get 36. So that would be how many drivers bought more than 12 gallons. And the last one, how many drivers bought 7 or 9 gallons or less. So you can see right here, here's my 9 gallons. So what I'm doing is, that's my cutoff. So I have this many, which is 12 drivers, plus this many, which is 8 drivers. These are all people who bought less than 9 gallons or less, plus these, and that's halfway between, that'd be 0 and 4, so that'd be 2. Adding all those up, we get 22. Okay, so use this video to check your answers, or use this video to actually watch it to get a better understanding.